Hello, my name is Brittany Dock, and I will be presenting my project on student disengagement in the virtual school setting. So, although student disengagement is not a relatively new issue in education, pretty much educating students in the virtual school setting is more of a recent phenomenon. So, of course, during the pandemic, a lot of schools had to transition from a traditional school setting to the virtual school setting, and many teachers and professionals were not prepared for this drastic change. So, in order for teachers to be more prepared for the 21st century learner, the learners that we're educating currently in our schools for the future jobs that they will have, I think it would be good to advocate for pretty much resources and stakeholders to become involved with ensuring that for those students that do opt to have or educate themselves in an alternative setting other than what is provided traditionally in the face-to-face setting, I think it would be important to make sure that they are being served just as their counterparts are being served in the traditional school setting. So regarding my advocacy plan, pretty much I am moving to promote or create an avenue in which students can be provided the same education as those students that are receiving education in the traditional school system. Some action steps that I came up with as far as strategies that I felt could cater to those action steps were pretty much to provide programs and initiatives that would strengthen existing schools that are choosing to, or school systems rather, that are opting to provide this alternative education setting. I think the projected timeline for this initiative to be effective would maybe be 3 to 5 years, because I think over time data would need to be collected to see what works and what does not work. Some strategies that I am proposing to promote or advocate for this particular action are sending out anonymous surveys regarding concerns of student engagement in classes, so that way teachers can provide feedback on this is what they're struggling with, this is what is working well for them. But of course, it remaining anonymous just for the sake of gathering data. Providing constant resources to inform teachers of recent development and effective student engagement strategies to be voted on either for school-wide implementation or on a departmental basis. Student engagement surveys for students to be a part of planning events. I think it would be important to create staff support check-ins. Some teachers flourish with student engagement in their educational settings, whereas other teachers may struggle. I think it would be important to hold frequent professional development workshops for teachers who need support in this realm. Having a designated staff member attend district-wide initiatives or support meetings. And then being able to confidently discuss student engagement concerns through a professional liaison to administrators and or school district representatives without repercussions. For the sake of this presentation, I'm going to focus on 3 specific micro-political strategies, so that way I can kind of go into depth as far as my vision for how I see this making an impact on and change in the educational setting. So the first strategy I would like to focus on is the sending out anonymous surveys regarding student engagement in the educational setting, so that way support could be provided via advocacy groups, training to specific stakeholders, whether that is teachers, parents, administrators. So pretty much with this strategy, I think it would be important to disaggregate the data appropriately based on certain subgroups. So I think it would be important to get the pretty much data from a subgroup of student and parents. What are their perspectives as far as what students need to be engaged in schools? Definitely teacher recommendations, because we are the ones that are kind of engaging with the students on a day-to-day basis, and what we see as far as providing feedback and data on where things may be lacking, where support is needed. Also, administrators do come in from time to time to observe for themselves, and I'm sure they're able to pick up on things that teachers maybe could use support in as far as student engagement is as well. I think once all this data is collected, having an open forum consisting of those same subgroup members to review the data for a best process for implementation of any resources and support that could be provided would be great towards the initiative mentioned in the action step. The next micro-political strategy I wanted to focus on was providing constant resources to inform teachers about recent development that is effective as far as engaging students. I think pretty much research comes out on a day-to-day basis, especially with virtual education being more of a recent phenomenon for K through 12. So I think it's important for teachers that are opting to educate students in this virtual education setting to be more in the know of what the current data and research is saying. So I think by providing teachers in this particular setting with what is the current research saying as far as effective strategies to be implemented for students to be successful in the virtual education setting would be indeed beneficial. The final micropolitical strategy I wanted to focus on was holding frequent professional development workshops. Even though the pandemic is somewhat behind us, the reality of it is that we do have this option available for students now. So I think it would be beneficial to support the teachers that are currently facing these challenges in the virtual education setting now. So although this advocacy plan is advocating for programs to be created and in place just as we have them in place for the traditional school setting, I think we still have to cater to the reality of we still are impacting students in this current setting now. So by recognizing teachers that are actually opting in to, work this specific job in the virtual setting, I think recognizing teachers that have been doing it for these past few years post-pandemic as educational professionals will give insight that others are not privy to. Also, with systems in place such as mentoring programs for maybe new teachers opting into this setting, viewing data such as attendance data in the virtual school setting, how is discipline reported in the virtual school setting, achievement data. I think by the systems that we do have in place that we're currently using from the traditional school setting transitioned over to the virtual school setting could be used as methods for those teachers that are maybe struggling in the virtual school setting, as far as providing support for those that aren't opting in. So the reality of it is, even though teachers may struggle, it is a reality that some teachers may not sometimes recognize or want to participate in professional development when it's needed. So using those systems that we already have in place, teacher performance, teacher keys effectiveness system, mentoring programs for new teachers, using that as a means to gauge whether a teacher needs to technically participate in professional development compared to them opting in themselves, I think would be a good measure or kind of strategy as far as making sure the teachers that need support are indeed getting the support. Nextly, I wanted to discuss the support matrix for how I feel like this innovation or any of these strategies could be supported and or upheld in the virtual education system. So for the high influence opposed, I listed pretty much state government, local school board, and pretty much I listed these two entities because I feel like in instances of resistance to restructuring platforms that are already adopted within a school system, I feel like there would be some opposition to supporting schools in the virtual school setting. So more so from a personal perspective, I have kind of seen firsthand how a school district will provide certain resources to the school district. But as far as me working in the virtual school setting, because certain resources are already provided to the school district, myself as a teacher in the virtual school setting is then forced to have to adapt what is technically used for the traditional school setting to that of the virtual. And from what I can see and what I've experienced and what I've heard from my counterparts or peers rather, we find ourselves having to do a lot of research and creating of our own, because the resources that are provided to us that do cater to that traditional school setting do not seamlessly transition to engaging our students. So we find ourselves very frequently having to somewhat reinvent the wheel to make sure that we're engaging our students in the virtual school setting properly. So I feel like pretty much as far as the federal government, administrators, teachers, instructional coaches, they would fall into a category of high influence and support, because I think these are the members that could see the most immediate change. They're the immediate stakeholders that pretty much can cater to advocating for the change in the virtual school setting. I included the federal government because pretty much funding can be provided from the federal government for education. And it could pretty much be catered to as far as initiatives or programs such as STEM and STEAM, to cater to pretty much initiatives in place such as Race to the Top and or No Child Left Behind. For the low influence opposed, I listed other school staff such as custodians, bus drivers, some teachers, some parents, and some students. I placed some teachers, parents, and students in this category because there are some that feel like students belong in a traditional school setting. During the pandemic, with us being forced to have to go to the virtual setting, there was plenty of controversy of how parents, even some students, even some teachers felt like children can't learn unless they're in the traditional school setting. So I do feel like even though it may be low influence, there are some teachers, parents, and students that are opposed to this particular alternative form of education. As far as other school staff, listing maybe custodians and bus drivers specifically, pretty much in the virtual school settings, their jobs somewhat become obsolete or not needed. So I think they would be opposed as well because they would be, of course, out of a job. In the realm of low influence but support, I still yet again listed teachers, parents, and students, because I do think just as some feel their children need to be in a traditional school setting, there are some parents that recognize my child flourishes just fine in an alternative school setting such as virtual education. So there are some parents that have been very supportive this year, even as far as local community stakeholders. This year alone in my current school, we've partnered with homeless shelters, community centers, churches to provide opportunities for our students for their educational endeavors and experience. Next, I wanted to discuss the influence matrix. So pretty much I have the same stakeholders listed in the same positions. Of course, with the high influence opposed, these are, of course, the stakeholders that require like particular attention in the design and implementation of these innovations or strategies that are being mentioned, because pretty much it is important to ensure that their participation is ensured for the success and interest provided for these particular initiatives that are being advocated for. For the high influence support, I listed the same stakeholders because their influence is imperative for the success of the innovation that I'm advocating for. Pretty much it could not be possible unless we had the support of these specific stakeholders. For the low influence opposed, these stakeholders, although still important, do not have such an impact as far as whether yay or nay. So, although they might need some limited involvement and monitoring in the initiative, they are unlikely to be focused on the innovation process because they're not as very supportive as far as the influence of this particular initiative. And then lastly, the low influence support. Although these stakeholders do have low importance to the innovation, these stakeholders might look or might be able to block or undermine the efforts that are being put in place to advocate for the initiative. So they could be seen as a detriment to educational purposes of what the initiative advocates for. For the micro influences, I listed administrators, teachers, parents, students, and other staff. So I listed these members of education, so to speak, as micro influences to the innovations aforementioned as far as the micro political strategies are concerned, as far as support for the actions that need to take place, because these individuals would be considered facilitators that pretty much oversee and contribute to the day-to-day operations, success, and failures of the initiative. The inner workings of the innovation would need to be monitored with data collected regularly for that projected timeline to determine if the micropolitical strategies mentioned are indeed having a positive impact on the student experience and learning in the virtual education setting. For my macro influences, I listed the state government, local board of education, federal government, and administrators. I listed these members because the innovations mentioned in the micropolitical strategies to support the action to take place could be impacted as far as structure, funding, and support from these specific stakeholders or entities. So with these specific members, and the members mentioned as far as micro influences that are overseeing kind of the day-to-day, the reporting has to be collected and reported to the macro influences to kind of determine whether resources, funding, or even legislation needs to be created to support the alternative education in the virtual school setting. As far as professional resources to support this initiative, with my specific project, I look to align positive behavioral intervention and supports with response to intervention as far as what we're currently doing at our local school to kind of curb student disengagement. So with the positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS, being something that is nationwide, implemented in schools across the nation, I felt like going to this website specifically as an outside resource would be good as far as figuring out what is already done in the traditional school setting and how could that be adapted for the virtual school setting. Also looking to improve relationships between the stakeholders and stakeholders as far as like the day-to-day as far as school operations. So bridging the gap between family and community and that of the school. I think providing resources for how to better engage parents and students or the family and community in catering to the needs of the virtual school setting will also be beneficial. So the Georgia Department of Education also provides resources and guidelines on how to better bridge the gap between the two. Thank you for listening.